Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. Tonight's just a little bit different for us. First of all, I need to remind you to like us on Facebook, like the Leather Elves on Facebook. Follow us and you'll get notifications of when we go live. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on Instagram. We try to post Instagram photos of enrichment and training and things like that. And you never know when a pop-up sale might come up on the Leather Elves. So thank you again for listening. Tonight's a little bit different. We're doing this recorded due to the time difference with my guest tonight. It was just not going to, well, it would have been possible, but it probably wouldn't have been very pretty. So we had to do it recorded, but there's some really amazing information that we want to share with you today. And so I hope you will stay tuned. So I was on the board of International Avian Trainers and Educators for many years, and one of the organizations that we supported and we worked with was Vulpro. Vulpro is located in South Africa, and they've been going through some stuff lately, and so I reached out to Carrie, who is I think she's their director, and I think that's the title she goes by. Just kind of all around do everything girl. And so I reached out to her and asked if we could do a flock talk on Vulpro and what's going on there. So we're lucky enough to have Caroline Hannweg with us. Caroline works at the center, and I have a brief bio because it's more interesting to listen to Caroline. So I'm going to read it to you guys, and then we'll get started. Caroline is a young biologist currently working at Vulpro in South Africa. She joined Vulpro in March of 2020 as a general assistant after completing her MSc in wildlife management at the University of Pretoria under Dr. Mark Keith, focusing on owl populations in an agricultural matrix near Johannesburg. She has always had a keen interest in nature and animals, and this led to her pursuing a career in nature. Caroline's interest in animals began extending to birds when her parents introduced her to birding in 2004. Since then, Caroline's passion for birds has only grown. Caroline has since taken the plunge in taking her education further and has registered for her PhD, yay, focusing on the effects of climate change on the movement and breeding behavior of African white-backed vultures in Southern Africa under the supervision of Professor Andrew McKechnie at the University of Pretoria, Dr. Cameron Safi of the Max Planck Institute, and Dr. Corinne Kendall of the North Carolina Zoo. Caroline's goal in life is to be able to use her skills as a researcher to contribute to the conservation of the environment. Working at Vulpro has expanded her knowledge on vultures immensely, which she is extremely grateful for. Caroline looks forward to furthering her contribution to the conservation of these important species through her work at Vulpro. Welcome, Caroline.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate it. It's very nice to be here.
It's so excited to see someone so enthusiastic about conservation, and it's really nice.
Thank you so much. That's lovely.
So a lot of people don't know that there is a global vulture crisis, and I want people to kind of get an idea of what's going on. Can you fill us in on why is it what makes it a crisis? What's going on?
Yeah, so sure. And it's a really great place to start, I think. So essentially, vultures, I think we're all sort of aware of them and what they do in the environment. Essentially, being obligate scavengers, cleaning up the environment, getting rid of carcasses. Vultures are obligate scavengers, so they are only, scavenging as opposed to, other scavengers, sort of like hyenas or other canids and that kind of thing, who might hunt occasionally. These birds are specifically scavenging. And the problem comes in where, these birds are diminishing. And the problem is that these birds, while they are able to break down carcasses, much like other species, they break them down a lot faster. And this is obviously helps cycle nutrients back into the environment. But the big issue is that they are able to stop the spread of diseases. And half of that is also the fact that these birds are, their stomach acids are able to consume carcasses with specific diseases, such as anthrax, rabies, specific diseases like that. And they then don't spread those diseases through the environment. Something that unfortunately we've seen though, with numbers diminishing in the past. Very specifically, there was the Asian vulture crisis a couple decades ago, where essentially numbers started to crash due to the use of some of the veterinary drugs that these birds cannot consume. It's poisonous for them, and that just dropped the population dramatically. And what we've then found was that those niches were being taken over by, other scavengers. Like I said, for example, feral dogs were taking those places, and they aren't immune to these diseases. So if something had died of something, such as rabies, they were catching those diseases, passing them on to each other. They interacting quite a bit with human populations, were then spreading that, to humans. And what they saw in Asia in the end was that these populations were causing humans to catch these diseases, and in the end that took a toll on the health system. And in India, for example, this ended up costing their healthcare system millions of dollars just from these vulture populations crashing. And unfortunately, so they were able to start banning the use of these drugs that were causing these crashes. And we, obviously in Africa, we started noticing the same kind of trends, and we started to put actions in place to stop that before we got to that kind of level. But unfortunately, we're still seeing those sort of crashes. And in the last 3 decades, populations in Africa have declined some of them have declined by over 80%. And obviously, this is not a good sign for their populations firstly, but for the ecosystem at large. So while we are trying to maintain really important populations, it's got a knock-on effect for the ecosystem and eventually for humans as well. So that's why we are trying so hard to protect the species, or these species, to make sure that we don't see the kind of knock-on effects that they did see in Asia all those decades ago already.
So you mentioned antibiotics that the veterinary medicine was prescribing, that was then, that the vultures couldn't process. What kind of things are that? Like, what kind of drugs are they?
So just to correct you, Robin, so it's not actually antibiotics, it's anti-inflammatory drugs. So it's the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and very specifically diclofenac, which is often used in livestock. That had the biggest effect on the gyp species. There's a number of species in that genus that they just wiped out entirely. And as far as I'm aware, there's only one drug that they've proven that is actually fine to use, one of these non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. But as a rule, we don't really give any carcasses or put any carcasses out at restaurants or to our birds that have been treated with anti-inflammatories, because we don't need those knock-on effects. So it's very specifically anti-inflammatories that have had those effects. Also things like barbiturates for euthanasia. Those are also problems for species, but the big problem from drugs was specifically non-steroidal anti-inflammatories.
Okay. Yeah, and and I know in some places they've stopped using those specific drugs, which is wonderful, but it's not everywhere. So it's still a challenge that's faced. Yeah. So, and I think we don't realize, we see vultures flying here in the United States, and it's, oh, okay, there's vultures, and oh, they're not so pretty, which I disagree. I think I mentioned to you, Caroline, my whole dining room is all vulture art. But I think they kind of get that bad rap. They get that, oh, vultures they're scavengers, they're horrible. They're so important to our ecosystem, though. I mean, we would be in trouble without them.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is a big problem. And the issue is that while we keep fighting, specific issues, other issues crop up. and it's something that we have to keep facing. So while we, have worked on the diclofenac issue and worked on the poisoning issues, then we start seeing issues with power line incidents. That's something that we fight daily at Vulpro, is the issue of power lines and these birds colliding with lines and electrocuting themselves on lines. And then now we're sort of seeing more and more incidents of poisoning for traditional medicine use and for poaching, unfortunately. So, it's sort of this ongoing battle that we keep having to fight to protect these super important birds, in our environment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's, with any kind of conservation effort, you do sometimes take care of one issue, one challenge, and then another one crops up. And it's an ongoing thing. And it's, I'd love to say that someday, Vulpro is not going to have anything to do besides promote the wondrous vultures. But unfortunately, I don't think that's ever going to happen. And I think we just kind of need to keep that in mind. So how did Vulpro come about, Caroline? Just so folks know.
Yes, so you mentioned previously Kerry. So Kerry Walters, she's our CEO, and she serves throughout our system, as you said. She's a one lady of many talents. She works very hard in our company, to make sure everything is running smoothly. She originally worked in corporate and decided to make the move to conservation. And as I understand it, she started having a look at vultures, sort of as a way in to conservation, and just fell in love with the species and realized that there's this really important place for these birds in the environment, and therefore a really important little spot in conservation where there wasn't enough focus on. And with that, she started the center. Originally as a rehab center, with birds coming in, treating them and sending them out. Obviously, birds are coming in that are non-releasable, and with that, she started our captive breeding program as well, and that has just grown exponentially. We have over 260 birds in our care. Some of them are permanent residents, some of them are sort of coming through the rehab system, but we're taking in over 100 birds in a year and releasing more than 50% of them in a year. And then each year we are able to raise around, I think this year we already have 17 or so chicks, which will all be released back into the environment as well. So, those animals or those birds that have not been able to release back into the wild, they're given a second chance at life and contributing to their population by, carrying on with what they're supposed to be doing, and those chicks contributing to the population. And with that, that's grown obviously into everything else, into the research department that I form part of, into our education that we also take very seriously. And that just all started from seeing that these birds really needed a little bit of help, and it's just grown from there.
Nice, very nice. So you mentioned, so some of the birds that are non-releasable can be part of that breeding program. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And so obviously some birds come in that are youngsters, that are immatures. So if they are non-releasable, we have a separate enclosure for them. But birds that are mature birds that have reached sexual maturity, they have their own separate enclosures, and we allow them to pick their own partners. They carry on, do their thing. We give them nesting material. They build their own nests. We sort of gear them towards the specifics of the species. So for example, the Cape vulture, which we have sort of the most of at our center, they are cliff nesting birds. So there is a purpose-built wall that has been built for them to sort of imitate a cliff face, and they then carry on and they find their little spaces in the nesting ledges. It's specifically south-facing because most of the colonies in South Africa are south-facing. And so they then build their nests in there with their nesting material. We try as far as possible not to be involved with the process. So we let them, carry on with it, do the incubating. We do have artificial incubators for birds that maybe aren't good parents or maybe first-time parents. And so, we will then help them with the hatching process, and then we let them raise the chick themselves as far as possible. I'm sure your audience knows very well about imprinting. So we just want to make sure as far as possible that we don't have any issues with birds that will be going back into the wild with that.
actually, why some of my audience may be familiar with that, but can you explain imprinting, just because it's something that's common for those of us that have worked in the business, but it may not be to some of our listeners.
Sure, yeah. So essentially it's these birds that as they're hatching, they're sort of forming an attachment with the bird or the human that has helped them hatching or that is raising them. And it happens quite early on in the hatching process, or as that bird has just hatched. And the reason that we want to make sure that we don't have any imprinting going on is if we release that bird, they then sort of have these attachments formed with humans where, you know, they sort of see them as not, well, good, but, you know, also a source of food and, you know, a source of comfort. And it's not something that we want to encourage with wild birds, just because that then might put them in a situation that would be detrimental to them. They don't need to end up in the wrong hands or not being able to feed themselves, for example. So for that reason, for wild birds, we try and avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, it is an issue, and it happens a lot, and it happens, you know, in some facilities it'll happen by accident. You know, it's not, you try to avoid it, and sometimes it just happens when you're working with rehab animals or animals that will be released at some point. But I think it's really interesting for people to know that. So and with the captive breeding, so how many different species are you guys doing captive breeding with?
So we have 9 species in Southern Africa, of which at Vulpro we don't have the bearded vultures, the Egyptian vultures and the Rupel's vultures. We have the other 6 species. And if I'm not mistaken, we have breeding pairs of all 6, if my maths checks out. So
I won't ask you to do math, I promise. You're a bird girl. We don't need to do math. Go ahead.
So our most common species that we have at the center is the Cape vulture, and that's because we are based at the foot of the Magaliesberg Mountains, which have 2 colonies within the mountains. So that's the species that we get in most commonly, and that also then just by probability is the species that we have the most non-releasable birds. And so I think I stand to be corrected, but at our facility we have, I think, 30 pairs, and then we have a satellite site as well, which has an additional 30 pairs, and then we have African whiteback vultures, which is our second most common species at the center. They are a tree nesting species, so we just build them little platforms. Some of these birds unfortunately are not flighted, so we have to give them little short fake platforms to make little trees basically for them to nest on. I think we have approximately, I want to say, about 20 pairs there that we have of the African whiteback vultures that are nesting, and then we have 3 pairs of lappet-faced vultures, which is the biggest species in Africa, and then we have an additional palm nut vulture pair, and then 2 pairs of hooded vultures. And then a pair of white-headed vultures. There we go. That's 6 species.
Good job. So it's interesting to me because this is kind of going off what we said we were going to discuss, but with companion parrots, a lot of people have birds and animals that are disabled, and so they create that assistance for them with, you know, platforms and ramps and things like that. And it's interesting that you guys are doing the same thing with your non-releasable animals. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's you can sort of see, so with our cliff face, with our artificial cliff face, you know, the birds that have more flight, they sort of pick nests that are a little further up the wall, whereas birds that aren't flighted might choose, you know, further down on the wall where they can just sort of hop up to it. We do have an enclosure that we refer to as our open enclosure. So these are birds that are amputees. And so they obviously can't fly out of the enclosure. So it's basically got a perimeter fence with no top on it. And so they are able to then wander around in there and do their thing in there, with wild birds coming down to feed with them. And they just have small little ramps, which we or platforms that we give them that they're able to hop onto. And they're very happy to nest there. They carry on, do their thing. So, yeah.
That was my next question. Is there that interaction with wild birds?
Yeah, so specifically the open enclosures is a really nice little spot. That's where these birds can actually physically interact with each other. So those are our non-flighted birds. Our biggest issue that we see at Vulpro is the issue of power line incidents. And that is often collisions with the lines that the birds don't see. And often this results in broken bones in the wings and that kind of thing. And what, through experience over time, Curious found that these birds actually cope quite well with amputations, with wing amputations. And they are, I think, because they're such a gregarious species, the Cape vultures and the whiteback vultures, they're happy to carry on being non-flighted. So they have their enclosure, they do their things, they nest, they pair up, and the wild birds are then able to come down and feed with them. We also have our vulture restaurant adjacent to our breeding enclosures. And so in that way, the birds do sort of interact with them, not on as direct a basis, but there is some sort of interaction with them too.
So you brought something up, and we had it further down the line, but I absolutely want to talk about it. Vulture restaurants. So that's a term we're very familiar with, but a lot of people are not. They're like, wait, you're feeding vulture? What's going on here? So tell us about vulture restaurants, please.
So yeah, it is always this really interesting question that people ask about. And as I understand it, it's of an African origin. So sometimes people like on an international basis have never heard of it, but it's such a cool concept. And it's essentially, so we spoke about poisoning earlier, and the fact that this is obviously a threat for these birds. The other problem that we sometimes see is that old farming practices are going sort of extinct, if I can say it like that, where essentially people aren't necessarily leaving carcasses out for vultures to feed on. And they might maybe burn a carcass or bury a carcass and that kind of thing. So we're looking at a landscape with less food available, but then also where food is available, it's not always safe for these birds. And so something that has begun over the last couple decades is the practice of vulture restaurants. And essentially that is setting up an area where safe carcasses that are safe for a vulture to consume are set out, and that allows the birds to then come down and feed on it. And there's this awesome little symbiotic relationship where the vultures are able to feed on something that is safe for them, and farmers that have safe carcasses for these birds are then able to get rid of their carcasses in a really eco-friendly, lovely way for them to, you know, get rid of their carcasses. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating. I was I mentioned to you earlier, I was able to visit a vulture restaurant in South Carolina at the Birds of Prey Center there, and it's just incredible to watch, you know, the wild birds come in and feed and know that it's a safe food source, know that it's you know, something that's not going to be carried to another, you know, another species. And so it's really, really neat. And if, you know, I hope the listeners will take some time and maybe Google vulture restaurants and see, you know, what it's all about. And if there are videos, and maybe we can get a picture, Caroline, of the restaurant at Vulpro, because that would just be great for people to see. So so you've got the center. What about community inclusion? So I know in the past, and I don't know exactly what the situation is where you are, but I know that sometimes the communities where, you know, vulture work conservation is being done, sometimes it's the members of the community that are at issue. You know, maybe it's the vultures in their eyes, the vultures are hindering their livestock or things like that. What kind of community education or outreach or inclusion do you guys do at Vulpro?
Yeah, and it's a really good point, Robin. You know, we can't sort of, as a conservation, any kind of conservation, it doesn't operate in a vacuum. You know, we can't do this by ourselves, and also we shouldn't do it by ourselves. You know, there's a whole community to serve these birds that are living with these birds, you know, every day. And it's a really important part of what we do is, you know, including the community as far as possible, and helping with education gaps, you know, to try and make sure that these birds are conserved. And so something that we do is we do monitoring in a number of sites across the country. And that is essentially where we go and monitor wild population numbers. So we go to breeding sites and we see what those numbers are looking like at the beginning of the season and at the end of the season to get an idea of breeding success for that year. And while we are there, we obviously are engaging with communities that are living with these birds on their properties or nearby on a regular basis. You know, we have to gain access to these sites. And within that, that means that we are communicating with them a lot. We're discussing the importance of these birds. You know, it's quite lovely to see when you find a new site, you know, and you say, hey, we see these birds might be on your property. What do you think about us maybe coming through and having a look at your numbers? You know, and from there, you know, building up that relationship to where these guys, they're so excited to know, what do our populations look like? Are we doing well? You know, are we looking better than the farm next door? You know, that kind of thing. What can we do more? And that's a really important part of making sure that those populations are being looked after within the community and helping people understand the importance of the birds there. And, you know, through that also, you know, restaurants end up being set up, you know, which also helps the birds. And then obviously, you know, just the general public that are around Vulpro, living there nearby. We also conduct a lot of education with school groups that are nearby, with tours and that kind of thing, just to help, you know, let people understand how important these birds are and how magnificent they are. And, you know, it's just a really important way that we include the community and make sure that education is being spread appropriately.
There's also something that I'd love for people to know about, and I know you guys participate, is IVAD, International Vulture Awareness Day. So tell people about that. I think it's great and it's fun.
So IVAD is this really awesome day where we get to celebrate vultures for a full day. We always try and celebrate it and do something special. The last couple of years obviously have been a bit difficult with COVID, you know, to get people involved. But something that we did last year that was awesome was we were able to conduct a virtual tour of sorts, and we were able to film going through our site, introducing people to some of the birds on our property, giving them a chance to see what our facilities are like on a really special day to celebrate these special birds. This year, in honor of IVAD, we are actually hosting an event, a matinee with a musical event and a 3-course meal. And yeah, it's very, very exciting. Set underneath the cliffs near one of our sites, you know, just to give people an opportunity to hang out, contribute to these birds in a really nice way, but also to see literally right there what they are looking after as well.
Oh, that's so cool. So what is it? What date is IVAD? It's September.
It's the first weekend of September, as far as I'm aware. So this year it is the 3rd of September.
Nice. I mean, it's such a great day. And I know here in the States, we do, you know, different facilities do things. We've got people doing educational things. We've got people doing just celebrations, and you know, it's nice for vultures to get highlighted, because I think, again, people don't always love vultures the way we do, you know. And
Yeah.
it
No,
but
absolutely. And I think that's the thing is, and you mentioned earlier, you know, sometimes they get a bit of a bad rap. They don't look great. They're not always portrayed the best and sort of, you know, Disney movies and that kind of thing. And I think people sometimes, not necessarily, I mean, there's definitely a group of people that maybe don't like them, but I think sometimes they just sort of fall by the wayside, you know, especially for more charismatic species. And it's really nice to have a day to just celebrate them the way they deserve.
I mean, you know, vultures are just, for lack of a better term, they're just really cool birds. You know, they do so much for us, you know, for the world, the environment. And they also, but like just the way their bodies function and what they are able to do is just, to me, it's really, really amazing. And I think they get put to the wayside, or ew, they're vultures, but they're really great. And so people need to know more about it. So what are some of the challenges that are being faced by the vultures? I know we've talked about some of them, but if you had to create a list of things that they're facing, not just in South Africa, but across the world, what things are we trying to avoid for the vultures?
So, look, obviously, like you said, we've listed a couple of things, and I think we've sort of touched on the most important things here. It's the fact that we are really struggling with power line incidents in South Africa specifically. It's something that we see on a weekly basis. We see birds coming in with power line incidents. Obviously, poisoning has always been a factor, and it continues to play a role. I don't know if it made international headlines, but in the last 2 weeks or so, we had 2 massive poisoning events that happened sort of within sort of 24 hours of each other, which wiped out about 150 white-backed vultures. And it's the breeding season now, so those birds, it didn't just wipe them out, most likely wiped out any chicks that they were sitting on. So it's something that we are facing constantly. And then something that's always also played a role, but that we're seeing more and more of these days, is the factor of poaching. And unfortunately, that falls into sort of 2 categories. Sometimes it's just persecution. It is also happens because of, these birds being used in traditional medicine practices. And so, for example, these 2 poisoning events that happened, it looks like that might have been linked with traditional medicine and with a poaching incident. So those are sort of the 3 things that we're really seeing a big problem with. Obviously, as with all species, habitat degradation is a problem, like we said about restaurants, a lack of safe food. And then something that I'm sort of focusing on with my PhD research now is trying to see how climate change might be affecting these birds as well. We don't know a lot about it, but we know that it's affecting birds. And so we want to understand a little bit more about how it might be affecting vultures, because these birds are, especially in South Africa, where we are on the southern tip of the continent, their ranges are shrinking and there's only so much place that they can go to. So, it's something that we have seen that it might start to be an issue, and that's sort of where my PhD research has come in to sort of look at how might that be affecting the birds as well, as sort of an emerging threat. But yes, those are sort of the main challenges that we're facing. And with that, as I said previously, we can't operate on a vacuum. And that includes the community, but also obviously bringing in authorities too. South Africa, I mean, we have our challenges, and unfortunately that has a knock-on effect that sometimes conservation doesn't get as much as we need. So it's something that, we're trying to work with all the time. We work with our local power utilities to try and get lines mitigated and try and stop incidents, for example. We're trying as far as we can to get people to understand that this is really important. We need people on board to make sure that we're protecting the species as well.
So the power line incidents, are there more power lines being built? What's causing that to occur?
So it has always sort of been an issue. And it's just something that we have identified as an issue and something that we focus our effort on. Like I said, it's what we see most commonly coming in, is these birds underneath lines, and it's always been there. It's always been a challenge. Where our challenges often lie is getting those lines mitigated. And making sure that, for example, flappers are put on lines to avoid collisions, that insulation is put on lines to avoid electrocutions, and that kind of thing. And I don't know how well known it is in the international community. South Africa has a problem at the moment with generating enough power for the country. And so our national power utility company is having quite a difficult time keeping the lights on to start with. And so it is difficult, to get that support behind mitigating these lines. They've got bigger fish to fry at this point. You know, so it is a bit of a struggle to get that, to make sure that we can make sure those lines are set up to not damage these birds further. And so, yeah, that is our big issue that we notice at the moment.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, you know, that's true with a lot of different conservation efforts, and that, you know, you can go to the companies or the organizations that are kind of making the issues happen, but they oftentimes have more important, not more important, I shouldn't say that, but you're right.
Yeah.
They have other struggles, other things that they're dealing
Yeah.
with, and our conservation efforts end up at the bottom of the list.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so,
Yeah,
so
and it is exactly that. It's you know, it's trying to, they of course have priorities, and it's sort of up to us to also make sure that our you know, our aims in conserving these birds are also in that list of priorities. You know, because we can keep turning a blind eye, but these birds, we need to make sure these lines are safe for these birds. Otherwise, it just keeps being a problem.
Yeah. So as an organization, what kind of challenges are you guys facing? So, you know, Vulpro does so much good work, and you guys are on the ground there doing the things that really need our support. But what kind of challenges do you guys face on a regular basis?
Robin, I would say definitely that our biggest challenge is making sure that we are able to keep doing what we're doing. And that obviously comes down to funding and hands on the ground, you know, so trying to make sure that we have consistent funding, that funding is coming in. We are an NPC, so we aren't in any way subsidized by the government, you know, so it's trying to make sure that we are consistently getting funding in. So that is something that we work on all the time, making sure that people are aware of us and what we're doing, and trying to bring the funding in. And then I think definitely it comes down to education again, you know, and making sure that people know how important these birds are and what we're doing to protect them, you know, just to make sure that they see the benefit of it. You know, it's not just about us, it's not just about the birds, it's not just about the environment, it comes down to people as well. You know, it's, if these birds are disappearing, we're going to see the knock-on effects into humans as well. And I think definitely that is something that it is making sure that people remain interested, you know, keeping them coming back and seeing, what are we doing, what are we up to, how can they keep helping us with the birds.
And so what is your workforce at Vulpro? Do you have community volunteers? What does your staff look like?
So our staff is quite a small staff. We have 8 permanent staff members. So it's Kerry, and then 2 of us within the research department, and then we have excuse me, 5 guys that work with husbandry and are there on a permanent basis, making sure that the birds that are in our care are permanently looked after. We have a local volunteer system that helps us out a lot with rehabilitation and with rescues. So they might come through, help us with driving long distances. If we've got a bird that's somewhere in the middle of nowhere, they're really helpful with that kind of thing. And then also, you know, like every now and then with on-site stuff, you know, with husbandry as well, or with health checks during the year and that kind of thing. And then we also have an international volunteer system. So we have international volunteers coming through. Sometimes they're local volunteers as well, but it's more on like sort of a long-term basis. So, you know, it might be sort of 2 weeks to 3 months, 6 months that they're there for, where they are living on site, again, helping with the husbandry of everything. But yeah, it is, like I said, you know, having funding and having hands is probably our greatest need at this point. Excellent.
So when we kind of need to circle back a little bit, tell me what husbandry, what is a husbandry routine like? I mean, that's a lot of birds for 5 husbandry. What does that look like?
So it's as you said, it's a huge job. Like I said, we've got sort of 260 plus birds in our care. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that it's definitely over 14 different enclosures. that these guys are looking after. So it includes cleaning waters a couple times a week. These birds, so it's something that's really not super well known about vultures, but they are exceptionally clean birds, which is not what you would necessarily think. But they are, digging into a carcass, getting nice and dirty. They don't like being dirty. So they then get in the water, they're washing themselves, so that water gets dirty pretty quickly. So the guys are working very hard, multiple times a week, cleaning out those waters entirely, refilling them. The birds are on a very specific schedule, depending on who's in what enclosures. So breeding birds might be getting more food, rehab birds might be getting more food, other birds might be on a more restrictive diet. So it's making sure carcasses that are coming in are split up appropriately for these birds, and then fed on specific days. And then making sure that enclosures are also looking good as well, so making sure that there's anything that's now changed with perches or, with shade netting or anything like that, they're keeping constant maintenance on those as well.
So do you guys face the threat of poachers at your facility?
It is definitely something that we are always worried about. We do take precautions where we can to make sure that we don't have to worry about that. So it's something that we are aware of. So far, so good. Touch wood. But it is something that we are always aware of and that we need to always keep an eye on to make sure that it's not an issue.
What about predators? I mean, are there natural predators that you guys have to safeguard against at your center?
So our center is on a farm, which is protected the whole way around with electric fencing and everything. That keeps most predators off the property. As far as I know, we don't normally have issues with predators. I think probably the biggest problem might be snakes with young chicks. But I think it's pretty intimidating getting in there with all those vultures around. So as far as I know, it hasn't been an issue in the past. I think we're pretty lucky that we don't have to worry about natural predators.
Mm-hmm. So my passion is training and enrichment. So with your non-releasables, what kind do you do enrichment? Is that something, I mean, after you take care of all those birds and you do all that husbandry, is there even space for their time for that?
Oh yes, and something I actually forgot to mention in the husbandry details of it as well is obviously we've got rehab birds in our care, so it's daily treatments as well, so there's so much going on, but as far as possible we do try and encourage enrichment as well. Our birds that are there the species that are there in great numbers, so the capes and the whitebacks, they are gregarious. So they pretty much are happy with hanging out with each other. That at least keeps them busy. Our concern more when it comes to enrichment is birds that are sitting in enclosures that are more maybe territorial, that prefer their own space, but obviously are not getting that kind of enrichment. So something that we do with some of our birds is training. It's not for anything. We don't necessarily show it off to the public. It's not very exciting. It's just sort of moving them from different sides of the enclosure, teaching them to come to a queue, but it just keeps them occupied and thinking, teaching them different things just to keep their minds going. And then we do offer different individuals, things like chains or pipes or things to play with. Vultures are so curious. They love to see new things in their enclosures. So even things like sticks or balls, they love to play with and see what it is. Sometimes, those big round balls with the holes in them, putting stuff in there, seeing how they play with that and interact with that, just to keep them a little bit busy. Yeah.
And yeah, the nice thing I find about vultures is it doesn't always have to be food based. It's, I was working with a rehab turkey vulture. And he used to, when you'd go in to clean his enclosure, he would go after your calves, the back of your legs. And so I was trying to figure out, and we had a lot of volunteers that were working at the rehab center. So it wasn't, they didn't want it. They're like, no, not doing it, not going in there. And so what we did was we took a paper bag And we put a couple of little tidbits in the bottom, and then we filled it up with just stuff, leaves and sticks and things like that. And you could take that in and you'd put it in, and then he would start to interact with that, and you'd grab the rake and start raking out the enclosure. So he was busy so your calves were safe while you were, trying to do your job. But I find that they're very easily engaged, and they're curious, for lack of a better term, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah.
We had a condor, that the very first big bird that my company worked with, at a zoo in the States, and he was pulling up his water. He had a water feature in his exhibit, and he kept pulling up the pipes. And the maintenance people were like, "Oh, this bird," and so we created a PVC rattle that we gave him, and he was perfectly happy to kind of walk around with his PVC rattle and make some noise. And he ended up leaving the pool alone. So, sometimes it's problem solving, so the maintenance guys don't quit. So it's important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've definitely seen it. We've had a couple New World vultures in our care. Definitely one of our biggest menaces was a nice king vulture. Also loved the back of a calf. Unfortunately, difficult to distract him. He did love a rake and a broom, so you figure yourselves a way around him. That was his favorite enrichment, was a rake or a broom. But
when you go to the store and buy the tools to clean things up, you buy extra brooms for that. Sometimes you have to think outside the box, so to speak.
Definitely, yeah.
And so we've talked a lot about the adversity and the challenges that you guys face and that the vultures are facing. Let's talk about successes at Vulpro, because I know you've had them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've had some really, really exciting successes. As I said, we are sort of releasing 50 plus rehab birds a year, which is a really exciting thing for us. It's always great to see them, head out. I think last year, and that is just rehab, we also releasing captive bred birds as well. We released 14 birds last year from our captive breeding program, and it looks like we're sitting on a similar trend for this year again. Literally all of those successes are brilliant. We had a release last week where we released 2 of our rehab birds that were ready to go on their way. One, I believe, had come out of a poisoning incident that we were able to bring back. And the second had a broken leg, which was pinned and healed really well. And he headed out as well last week. So it's really, all the successes are just brilliant. It's always a treat to see a bird that comes in looking essentially dead. And that bird, coming back to life, and even birds that are not releasable, just seeing them come back to life and come back into their own, and then find a little space, at Vulpro with, the other birds, maybe finding a space to have a nest and finding a partner and raising successful chicks. I think some of our most successful captive bred or captive breeding pairs are, some of our oldest rehab success stories, birds that have come from the brink of death and that are now still able to contribute to their population.
And I just think it's wonderful, and there's so much to it. And, the fact that those birds are still able to contribute genetic material to the wild population is just,
absolutely.
So I just, I love what you guys do, and I'm so excited to talk to you today. So, all right, now we've got all this wonderful information. We know the good things you're doing and the challenges you're facing. How do our listeners help? What can they do?
Okay, cool. Awesome question. Well, obviously, you've heard what we're up to today. You heard what we're doing. Spread the word. Spread the word about how awesome vultures are. Spread the word about how awesome African vultures are and what we're doing to save them. If at any point you are feeling adventurous and you think this sounds like something amazing to do, to head out to Africa and help protect our vultures, awesome. Get hold of us. We'd love to chat to you about volunteering programs and what would work for you. We have them in place, so reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Obviously funding is always super exciting, so if you can donate, if you are able to donate, that's always fantastic, and we always appreciate it. Doesn't matter how much it is. And then we have some really awesome, initiatives to bring in money as well. We've got a beautiful coffee table book. I'll definitely send Robin some photos so that we are trying to get more and more of them into international spaces as well, for you to get a hold of. And then we obviously do adoption programs. I'm sure you know how they work. I know a lot of zoos and places like this do it. Where essentially you sort of sponsor a bird at our facility. You get to name them, we give you an adoption certificate, and we let you know how they're doing, just so that you sort of know where your money's going and you know that you are contributing to one really special bird at our facility.
Nice. So if people want to learn more about that, Caroline, how do they do that?
So you can definitely check out our website. So that's www.vulpro.com. You can email me directly at info@vulpro.com. And then we're on social media. We're on all the big outlets. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you just search Vulpro, and I'll send Robin the handles as well, just so that you can find us there. But I think if you search it, you should be able to find us as well.
Excellent. All right, and we'll get Nick. So Nick is who does our tech stuff, and Nick is amazing. The people who listen on a regular basis are big Nick fans. But we'll get Nick to put that information up as well, so that it's right in there. The link will be with the video. So Caroline, I can't thank you enough. This has been, I always have great guests. My guests are wonderful, but there are some that just make me smile and make me feel good. And I know this is kind of ending your day, right? We're kind of towards the end of the day. This is beginning my day. So I want to thank you for setting the tone for a great day, and for all the hard work for everybody at Vulpro. And I know there have been some recent difficulties that are happening there, and please thank Carrie for allowing you the time to talk to us, and you take care and keep doing what you're doing, and it's really appreciated, the work that happens there. So
awesome. No, thank you so much, Robin, and thank you so much for thinking of us and for giving us the platform to chat to you and to chat to your audience today. It's always appreciated. So yeah, we really appreciate you thinking about us. I'm really excited to follow what you're doing and to check out a little bit more about what you're up to. It's so exciting, and it's really very appreciated. I know from me and from Vulpro and from conservation at large. So thank you so much.
Well, you take care, and we'll be talking to you again, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. Keep well.
Bye-bye.
Good morning and welcome to Vulpro. Today is a really special day on the calendar for vultures, as today is International Vulture Awareness Day. So to celebrate, Vulpro wants to take you on a special tour of our facilities. My name is Caroline and I'm going to be your tour guide today. So let me take you on this tour and let's go check out what Vulpro has to offer. Vulpro is a conservation centre focused on protecting African vultures through collaboration and innovation. At our site, we focus on the rehabilitation, captive breeding, and the research of these fields. Currently, we house approximately 200 birds permanently, with other birds in and out of the facility during their rehabilitation process. Beyond our centre, we conduct surveys of various populations of vultures across South Africa. We are also involved in various ongoing research studies that involve protecting these species as best possible. This is both conducted in-house and with various organisations across the world, in order to better our understanding of how best to protect these birds. This enclosure houses most of our African white-backed vultures, and it serves two purposes. Firstly, it is here for the captive breeding program, so birds that are here permanently will get the chance to pair up and then build their own nests and hopefully raise successful young. You can see just over here at the back of the enclosure in that big nest, we've already had successful breeding this season, and there's actually a chick on that nest. The other purpose of this enclosure is for rehabilitation. So if birds have been successfully rehabilitated and we are able to release them, they come here for their final phases of that rehabilitation. And in that way we can check if they can fly, so if they're able to make it up onto the big perches at the top, and we can just assess and see if those birds are ready to go back into the wild. African white-backed vultures are found throughout Africa, and in South Africa we have approximately 7,300 mature individuals. These birds' populations have declined by over 90% throughout their range, and for this reason these birds have been listed as critically endangered. One of the main threats to this species is the threat of power lines. These birds are especially vulnerable to this as they are often found nesting within the power line structures. This enclosure is our white-headed vulture enclosure. At Vulpro, we have a pair of white-headed vultures, and white-headed vultures are known to be quite shy and they keep to themselves, so they have their own enclosure to help encourage their breeding. So you'll see they have made a makeshift nest there at the top, and we hope that in time they will lay eggs and breed here at Vulpro for us to be able to release their young back into the wild. The critically endangered white-headed vultures are one of the smallest vulture populations in South Africa, with only 160 mature individuals. These birds are now largely confined to protected areas within the Lowveld and Zululand in South Africa. As they tend to avoid areas with large amounts of human disturbance, these birds are very sensitive to habitat degradation and the reduction of available food for them. At Vulpro, we house 7 lappet-faced vultures. This includes 2 pairs, 2 males, and a youngster. These birds, unfortunately, are not releasable, but they do have a second chance of contributing to their wild populations through our captive breeding program. Thus far, we have not had any successful eggs, but hopefully in the future, these birds will be able to breed and contribute to their wild populations. Lappet-faced vultures are the largest species of vulture in Africa, with a wingspan of nearly 3 meters. In South Africa, we have approximately 300 mature individuals. This species is listed as endangered throughout their range, and this is due to a number of factors that affect these populations. However, the main threat appears to be poisoning, both indirect and direct. We also house 3 palm nut vultures, including a breeding pair. An interesting fact about these vultures is that their preferred food is Paraffia palm nuts, making them omnivorous vultures. This is Vulpro's Cape Vulture captive breeding enclosure. Now, Cape vultures often nest on the south-facing cliffs of mountains, and for that reason we have created this artificial south-facing cliff wall for these birds. Now, none of these birds are releasable, however we provide them with the materials such as nesting material for them to build their own nests and recreate that natural scenario where they are able to produce chicks. Now, we are nearly at the end of our captive breeding season here at Vulpro, and behind me there are a couple of chicks sitting in their nests with their parents, and we're looking forward to releasing them in the coming months. In the past, we have released multiple successful chicks back into the wild, and we're really excited to see these guys back in the wild contributing to their wild populations. This is our open enclosure. A number of birds that come in, unfortunately, end up having to have wing amputations due to the extent of the damage on them. However, these birds are able to live long, happy lives in our open enclosure. The enclosure has no top as these birds are unable to fly and allows for wild birds to come down and feed with them. This enclosure is our Cape Vulture rehab enclosure. So much like the whiteback enclosure that we've shown you previously, this enclosure is built so that we can see if these birds are able to fly to the higher perches and across the enclosure entirely. However, this enclosure serves two purposes, and the second of that is to keep young Cape Vultures that are unable to be released. Now, these birds in time will form part of our captive breeding program, but these birds take about 6 years to reach sexual maturity. So before that time, they will stay here amongst other young vultures, and once they reach that age, they will then be moved to the Cape Vulture breeding enclosure. Cape vultures are the only endemic vulture in the region and are also the heaviest vulture. South Africa is the last stronghold for breeding birds of the species and hosts 8,800 mature individuals of the 9,400 mature individuals in the world. This species is listed as endangered, and one of the main threats that we see to this species at Vulpro is the threat of power lines, either resulting in electrocution or collision incidents. We also house a number of other individuals, so let's go check those guys out. A black vulture from the Americas, we also house a king vulture, three Andean condors from South America, three spotted eagle owls, and our resident African fish eagle. Welcome to our hide at Vulpro's very own vulture restaurant. There's birds feeding right now, which is why I'm talking so quietly, but let's go check. A vulture restaurant is a place to provide safe food for vultures on a regular basis. This is unfortunately necessary as there is a lack of safe food available to vultures in the wild. This is due to the fact that over the years, farming practices have changed, and many carcasses are burned or buried instead of being left out for vultures. The carcasses that are left out for vultures are also not always safe for them to consume, as many veterinary drugs are not safe for vultures. For this reason, it is vitally important to ensure that there are places where these vultures can find safe food in order for them to continue surviving in the wild. Thanks so much for coming on this tour with us. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments below and we'll get to them as soon as possible. If you enjoyed this tour and you'd like to take your own tour of Vulpro, please pop us an email. We'd love to have you here sometime. In the meantime, have a fantastic International Vulture Awareness Day and we'll see you again soon. Bye!